Relay, we're covering today's top boxing news.
Natasha Jonas versus Marie-Eve Caire. Let's talk about the fight. Not the aesthetic I expected. I didn't expect Marie-Eve Caire, an otherwise completely defensively minded fighter, being as aggressive as she was in this thing. I half expected Natasha Jonas to be the aggressor on the front foot, imposing her will, closing the distance, getting mid-range to inside on Marie-Eve Caire where she is most vulnerable. Mid-range to inside, Marie-Eve Caire is likelier to dive into a clinch than trade blows. I expected that Natasha would be the aggressor and Marie would be the defender. As it stands, it was the opposite of that. It was Marie-Eve Caire attempting to jab her way in and impose her size.
She stepped out of character for this one.
Broke character. Marie-Eve Caire, the otherwise defensively minded stick-and-move outside jabber, the pure boxer, decided to take it to the naturally smaller woman in Natasha Jonas and was effectively countered.
Because while Marie-Eve Caire definitely was the aggressor in this thing, and it was Natasha moving lateral and boxing off the back foot, it was also Natasha showing the cleaner work, the cleaner punches, the better boxing.
Don't misunderstand me. I believe this was the hardest fight of Natasha Jonas's junior middleweight campaign. The hardest fight so far. Harder than the Chris Namas fight, certainly harder than that fight, and even harder than the Patricia Bergoult fight.
This fight was a lot harder than those fights, more physically taxing on the naturally smaller fighter in Natasha Jonas, but she managed to get the job done.
As Marie-Eve Caire would attempt to close the gap and get mid-range to inside on Natasha, Natasha would meet her at the door with jabs, backhands, straight left hands,
and right hooks.
Some chippy situations mid-range to inside in the clinch. In the clinch, Marie-Eve Caire, the naturally bigger woman, she did look a lot stronger than Natasha Jonas.
And the pace at which the fight was being fought, Natasha Jonas didn't seem quite as sharp as she did in her previous two fights. It seemed like the pace was catching up to her and catching up to her fast.
It's likely because between Natasha Jonas's age, her frame, and how much weight she's carrying, and the fact that in this fight, unlike in those fights, in this fight, she was actually being stalked. She was actually being pressured, and in some ways, forced to move and forced to fight.
The pace at which the fight was being fought seemed to have wore on Natasha Jonas's gas tank. She did look tired in certain moments.
Though overall, she did show the better boxing more often than not. The cleaner work, the cleaner punches.
And that's really the reference point for everything, you know. Who's actually landing? Who's actually getting off shots, clean, clear shots that the judges can see, and who's really doing damage?
And around, whether you're front foot heavy or fighting off the back foot and moving lateral, one way to know what's actually happening in a round and what's really going on, who's really winning it, is who's landing clean punches more often than not.
Now, I understand that some fights are chippier than others where, you know, both fighters are really letting their hands go and both fighters might be getting off shots, big shots. But in this fight, the cleaner, clearer, eye-catching punches were for the most part coming from Natasha Jonas. I had the fight scored for Natasha 7 rounds to 3.
But like I always say, there's more to boxing than what you see on paper. Those were 7 hard-earned rounds. 7 physically taxing, physically arduous rounds for Ms. Great Britain, who had to earn every moment, earn every round. She did win in that fight. Marie-Eve Caire made her work, and she took me by surprise because I wasn't expecting Marie to be that aggressive.
Though it wasn't without a price. Natasha Jonas drew blood, busted up Marie's nose real nice.
I mean, Marie-Eve Caire, she got hit a lot. Got hit with a lot of backhands and a lot of right hooks, but she took the punches well. She was able to endure them, though not without
paying the price for being the more aggressive fighter. With that, Natasha Jonas,
she is now this division's WBC, WBO, and IBF Ring Magazine lineal champion.
A great display of boxing that allowed her to overcome the size, natural size, and aggression of the naturally bigger woman. Though in this fight, unlike her previous fights, you could see that.
Even if Natasha is a better boxer than most of the girls at 154 pounds, they are bigger, and that physicality has its role to play in making a fight difficult for a naturally smaller fighter who moved up in weight.
She looked a little bit more vulnerable in this fight. She really did look a little bit more human.
A woman on fire in the Chris Namas fight and a force to be reckoned with in the Patricia Bergoult fight. But in yesterday's Marie-Eve Caire unification match, Natasha Jonas did seem
like a small fry.
Better stay away from Clarissa Shields.
And Mary Spencer, who's hot on her trail.
It was a great display of boxing from Ms. Great Britain, but it wasn't without its chippy moments. Congratulations to her, and we'll see what the upcoming year holds for the newly crowned, unified Ring Magazine and lineal junior middleweight champion, Natasha Jonas. That wraps up the main event of the Boxer Show. We then move on to the main event of the Matchroom Show later on in the day here in the United States, the super lightweight contest between Montana Love and Australia's own Steve Spark. Steve Spark, you might be familiar with that name. Some time ago, Steve Spark stood in for Michael Zarafa down there in the land down under in Australia. He stood in for Michael Zarafa after Michael shat it with Tim Tszyu, and we all know what happened. Tim Tszyu, he laid Steve Spark out. Now, that was up there at junior middleweight, but
Steve was just a late replacement. He doesn't normally campaign at junior middleweight. He normally campaigns at 140 pounds, super lightweight.
yesterday's fight with Montana Love was a super lightweight contest, fought at 140 pounds. Noticeable discrepancy in size between Steve Spark and Montana Love.
How the fight ended is what everybody's talking about.
Though for my money, how the fight was playing out thus far has a lot to do with why the fight ended the way that it ended. The size, power, and aggression of Steve Spark seemed to have been bothering Montana Love. Dropped by a right hand in the second round.
Yeah, Steve Spark might not be cut out to campaign as a junior middleweight, but at super lightweight, he's a big guy for 140 pounds.
He's a big super lightweight, and early on in this fight, you could see that Montana Love was struggling to manage the distance and get off the counter shots as the taller, longer Steve Spark closed the gap on him, attempted to walk him down.
Yeah, Montana Love was struggling to manage the distance in this thing.
Montana Love, who's been with Matchroom for about, 2 fights now? Matchroom decided to sign this guy after he beat Ivan Baranchyk on the undercard of a Jake Paul fight. I believe that was the Tyrone Woodley fight.
You know, he stopped Ivan Baranchyk, he did, but context is key here, folks. Ivan Baranchyk was coming off a physically taxing fight, the War, the Fight of the Year candidate with Jose Zapata. I feel like he left it all in the ring with Jose Zapata and didn't have much to bring to the table in the Montana Love fight.
The Montana Love fight that was stopped in 7 rounds, I believe, was about 7 rounds.
Matchroom decided to sign this guy after that, and since then, I've seen him 2 times since then.
He had an underwhelming performance against Gabriel Valenzuela, and we see how the Steve Spark fight ended.
Not just how it ended, but how it played out. I'm sorry to say that I don't really see a world-class fighter in Montana Love.
Of all the guys that have been floating around on the outskirts of the super lightweight division, Regis Prograrius would have been a better investment, I think. A better fighter, a former champion, a proven guy, a more proven fighter than Montana Love, and I don't know what effort, if any, went into bringing him into the fray. Matchroom made a decision to sign Montana Love to a multi-fight deal, and I can't say that they've gotten a return on that investment. I don't know that they ever will, because I don't see a world-class fighter in this guy.
He struggled with the height, the reach, and the power, the aggression of Steve Spark.
Looks to me like he was trying to set up the counter shots, catch Steve Spark on the way in, but due to Steve's physical dimensions, the fact that he's so much taller and so much longer than Montana Love, he doesn't need to be right up on him to touch him with shots, touch him with straight punches from the outside coming in, at which point Montana Love would just give up ground and retreat.
He wasn't fast enough and sharp enough to hold his ground and set up the counter shot, land it, and safely exit.
Whenever Steve Spark would let his hands go, try to put the squeeze on Montana Love, he seemed to have had him under a great deal of pressure. Most of the fight was really just Montana Love giving up ground and backpedaling with his back on those ropes.
Couldn't get off the counter shots effectively, couldn't hold the center of the ring.
Was presented with a very big guy, very big super lightweight in Steve Spark, who understood the assignment. You don't coast on foreign soil, and Steve Spark was doing anything but coasting. He was really laying into Montana Love, making it a hard fight and a hard night, and I think that made Montana Love frustrated, which is what led to the fight ending the way that it did, with Montana Love quite deliberately sending Steve Spark over those ropes.
Listen, could the referee have allowed the fight to go on? Yeah, of course he could have.
Was it really necessary for him to disqualify Montana Love? Was that the only way to go?
I don't think so, but being honest with you, I'm not the least bit upset that he did, because Montana Love knew exactly what he was doing and exactly why he was doing it. For my money, that was a fight that he was losing.
At least a fight that he felt he was losing. He was frustrated, couldn't deal with this guy's pressure.
Sends a guy over the ropes, gets himself DQ'd, gets himself disqualified. I heard Eddie Hearn say something about contesting that decision on Monday.
But what's the point? Anybody that reviews the footage can see in plain sight that Montana Love quite deliberately sent Steve Spark over those ropes. You could do a rematch between these two guys. You can have them run it back.
I don't know that it goes any differently because I hate to say, Montana Love is not a world-class fighter.
Sorry, I've seen him, and I can't say that I'm impressed. If Eddie Hearn wants to bring a world-class fighter, perhaps a former or future champion, into the fray, he should look to the winner of Prograis versus Zapata. If the winner happens to be Regis Prograis, enter into a co-promotional situation with that guy. Do what you've got to do to get Regis.
If you want to have a prize stallion in that super lightweight show,
you're better off signing Regis Prograis and doing what you've got to do to sign him if he beats Zapata than wasting any more time and wasting any more money, production costs, on Montana Love. I'm sorry to say, I've given the guy a chance. I don't see a world-class fighter. I don't see a future champion.
You know, they brought out all the bells and whistles for this thing. They had dances, they had a band. I saw guys playing trumpets.
Alicia Baumgartner and Sky Nicholson were also in attendance for the fight.
This was embarrassing.
Embarrassing for Montana Love, who was disqualified. Steve Spark was awarded the W. I wouldn't be surprised if they try to do a second fight, try to do a rematch. There is some unfinished business there.
But like I said, Montana Love just continues to underwhelm.
In men's heavyweight news, Anthony Joshua had this to say. He says, Deontay Wilder fight will definitely happen. Anthony Joshua, who is reported to be back on the market for corner trainer.
So he's not going to work with Robert Garcia no more.
I happen to think he actually looked better in the second Usyk fight than he did in the first. I think that he made some improvements. Better still, Anthony Joshua was quoted as saying, yeah. I look at Deontay Wilder in the same fashion. He said he's got a couple of years left, and he probably wants to put me on his hit list, Joshua told IFL TV. So it's a fight that'll definitely happen. Now, he's more than eager. He's a bit older now, so he's looking to make the last few years of his career a successful one. He wants to fight some of the top names of the division, so yeah, I'm sure he'll be keen to fight me. From March 2018 to June 2019, both Wilder and Joshua controlled the heavyweight championship picture. Wilder held the WBC crown, while Joshua owned the WBA, WBO, IBF, and IBO titles.
Anybody that's been following this channel as far back as 2018 will know I said it then. These guys might not never fight.
And if you want to say that I'm being biased, if you want to say that I'm being partial, you can go right on ahead, but I'm going to come right out and say it.
What?
Deontay Wilder's ego was too big to get that fight over the line. He was demanding far too much.
He wanted a 50-50 split.
Well, listen, buddy. You're not the same draw that this kid is. You don't have as many alphabet titles as he does, granted, but irrespective of alphabet titles, you don't generate as much revenue as this guy, so if you really want to get him in the ring, you have to bite the bullet. Deontay Wilder didn't want to do that.
You gotta make sacrifices. The same kind of sacrifices Floyd Mayweather made to get Oscar in the ring.
The same kind of sacrifices Evander Holyfield made to get Mike Tyson in the ring.
You think those guys didn't make sacrifices to get those fights? They made sacrifices. Deontay Wilder didn't want to do that.
DAZN, then still a new entrant to the world of boxing, wanted to stage the fight and offered Wilder $100 million for a 3-fight package that would include 2 matchups versus Anthony Joshua. Wilder, however, ultimately turned down the deal, citing dishonesty from DAZN.
What were they being dishonest about?
Deontay Wilder wanted to know what Anthony Joshua stood to make from the fight.
And I said it then. This ain't a pay-per-view to where you need to worry about the splits.
During the fight, at least at that point in the juncture, when DAZN was a new entrant into the American boxing scene and a new entrant into the world of boxing overall, it was a different animal. It was a different beast. And Deontay Wilder versus Anthony Joshua wasn't going to be a pay-per-view, at least not on DAZN, because DAZN didn't have pay-per-view functionality yet. That functionality didn't come into play until some time later, approximately a year or 2 years.
Bottom line was they were offering Deontay Wilder more money than he'd ever made for a fight that he claimed he wanted.
More money than he had ever made for a fight bigger than any fight he had had up until that point. Deontay Wilder, after rejecting that offer and losing to Tyson Fury in one-sided fashion, admitted himself he stood to make more from the DAZN deal than what he ended up making with Tyson Fury.
He admitted that himself. Those are his words, not mine.
So when Deontay Wilder cited dishonesty as the reason that he didn't accept DAZN's offer to him, only for him to end up getting beat for less money than he was offered by DAZN, well, it's not that they were being dishonest, it's that Anthony Joshua, what he makes from the fight, that's none of your business.
Because this wasn't your run-of-the-mill conventional situation where you guys are splitting a pot.
Wasn't your run-of-the-mill domestic cable and satellite pay-per-view situation where you might need to know that. This was different. At that time, DAZN was attempting to break into the American market, and
they were willing to overpay. At least at that time, they were willing to overpay fighters in excess of their actual marquee value, their actual market value. Wilder was one of those fighters, but
Jermall Charlo was another. He was offered $7 million to unify titles with Demetrius Andrade. They were throwing their weight around, willing to spend big cash to make fights happen, but
Wilder didn't take the deal. His ego was out of control.
Put your thinking caps on, kids. This was after the first Tyson Fury fight, but before the second one. Deontay Wilder had not yet lost the WBC title to Tyson Fury, and he felt that because he had a Fury rematch as an alternative, in spite of Fury making a decision to sign to Top Rank,
further complicating the situation.
Fury wasn't signed to Top Rank in that first fight. They didn't come into it until after the first fight, but before the second.
Wilder thought that was more important.
The old saying goes, pride comes just before the fall, and I happen to believe Deontay Wilder's pride would not allow him to be the B-side fighter to Anthony Joshua, because if he was willing to have made that concession then, we would have got that fight. His pride wouldn't let him take a back seat to Anthony Joshua.
You heard what I said. To do the fight, he needs to concede to being a B-side fighter because that's what he is. And even here today, I don't think he can do that. I don't think his pride will let him.
Anthony Joshua's assertions that a Deontay Wilder fight will happen
sounds good.
Just being honest with you, I think that Deontay Wilder and Shelly Finkel's divisiveness and Deontay Wilder's ego is just as much an obstacle here today at the end of 2022 going into 2023. I think it's just as much an obstacle here today as it was yesterday in 2018 and 2019. The bottom line here is
this was always a big fight, and it still is a big fight. As far as money, the money was always there.
Money wasn't the problem. Egos were the problem.
Deontay's ego